Come after, for Cora and Luna lose. As I went down in the rivers to pray, studying about that good old way, and who shall wear the robe and crown? Good Lord, show me the way. Oh, children, let's go down, come on down, come on, children, let's go down, down in the rivers to pray. A yard is waiting for you. It's somewhat spare, good-sized yard, a variant of rubble. It was never a garden. It is waiting for you to walk and crawl and lie on the ground. And maybe it will soon be a garden when you come, stand, bend, plant flowers, have a vegetable patch, helps feed you, and stems beginning to feed others. Dig down, study deeper, and play with a hose. Will water come in pellets? World given over to simply horizontal barrier? A virtual wall, an invisible wolf. Will it rain and snow ever again? And maybe willful have a stream found virtuous as water, as occasion in a storm to drink, and you be as most kids ask again. Touch water, a waterfall, and walking this yard in a moist morning, and waits for you to come soon.
Anne Waldman is a revered poet, performer, professor, editor, and cultural activist. She's the author of more than 45 books, including Gossamer, Manatee Humanity, Structure of the World Compared to a Bubble, and the feminist epic The Iovis Trilogy, which won the 2012 Penn Center USA Award for Poetry. The recipient of the Poetry Society of America's Shelley Memorial Award, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and the Before Columbus Foundation's Lifetime Achievement Award, Waldman makes her home in New York City and in Boulder, Colorado, where she is a distinguished professor of writing and poetics and artistic director of the summer writing program at Naropa University. Her newest book, Mesopotopia, is an epic of wonder and awe as the poet explores literature and history and politics and science as an open system, looking perhaps for a way to creation despite living in desperately destructive times. Anne, thank you so much for talking to me and coming on to the Drunken Odyssey.
Thank you. My pleasure. And I love the name of your show, your podcast.
Well, we can begin there because at first I was leaning in a little bit to the joke of, the drunken writer and the tendency of writers to drink themselves into stupors either during or after writing. And as the Drunken Odyssey, I'm a firm believer in we need our skills and our training as writers to help chart a course, but we are not in control. We can try and manage the situation, but we don't control the ocean so that we aren't fully in control of our stories. We're like Ulysses trying to get home. So
thank you.
Perhaps,
very, very beautiful.
So perhaps that is a sentiment that you can endorse.
Well, I'd say I've worked so much in community and helped found the Jack Kerouac School, as you know, in Boulder, Colorado, in this incredible environment of mountains. I'm always summoning the negative ions that the atmosphere alone helps you breathe and think thoughts towards your poetry and writing. And I must say, with all the amazing stories of the wildness and ups and downs of the various members of the Beat literary generation, these people were really working on their work always and thinking, and the conversation is so lively. We have a 50-year oral archive of not just poetry readings and that sort of thing, but lectures, discussions, interviews, sharing mind to mind. So I'm a firm believer in that. I think, no, there shouldn't be any barriers, in terms of what you need to explore. And I think there's so many ways. I know Gary Snyder speaks about, learning one tradition, whether it's the stars or study astrology or learn tarot or study a Buddhist system or whatever. All these systems we have to help us expand our consciousness and imagination. what else do you want to do? So, the elixirs of our time and the elixirs of ancient times are going to go on, and they can be imbibed or tested or explored. But I always have felt, in my experience anyway, coming back to a kind of source which needs, this motion of getting out of the neurosis that we're with all the time. I mean, right now it's harder than ever. When you pick up the news and so on, and you're very engaged. Actually, I feel I am. I just wrote a protest poem. The assignment was take the word democracy and then take the word militarize, and about how we can't militarize, democracies. So had to work on that. It starts out with precarity, precarity, precarity. Don't make a mockery of democracy. So, and in the meantime, the word democracy, there'll be a ice sculpture where the word democracy is melting. And so this poem is, anyway. No, I'm glad to have assignments at this time.
Well, when Trump was elected the first time, I participate in this reading series called Loose Lips, and they thought it was a fun idea. Let's write literature about the news, and so everybody has to generate something new. And then Trump happened, and it's like, so we've been trauma bonding almost ever since, because this is still an ongoing series. But I wrote a piece because I want to say this was before his first inauguration. Like, I'm a Disney fan, and I can't square that with all the other things that I love. But Nixon, from the Hall of Presidents, started whispering in my ear about how this was truly a disgrace about to happen to the Hall of Presidents, but the entry of this new person. Yeah, I found I was channeling, maybe not Nixon, but the robot of Nixon. This quasi concept of Nixon, who, unlike Trump, was a very smart guy, crazy, but smart.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm really fascinated by the idea of, and the worst question to ask any writer is, where do you get your ideas from? That it's a worthless thing probably to ask, or it's in the wrong spirit. But I am keenly interested in, how do we not let our daily lives and the news silence whatever joyful noises we might hear.
Right. Well, I'm very engaged with that and do the best I can and work with others and teach and so on. But we started some events called Poetry is News That Stays News. So, just claiming the news for poetry was fun. And I'm finding it's a very busy time, the poets, because poetry doesn't, it's not worth very much in terms of either a lucrative, it's not really, I've never thought of it as a career. I mean, it's my life path, but it's not some career you study for and you pass certain tests and so on. I'm very blessed to be published as I've had to work, and I've worked on the other side of things, helping others, and founded a magazine, Angel Hair, years ago. And we did so many mimeograph, a huge amount of publishing in the early days of the Poetry Project at St. Mark's in New York, and also in the wonderful hills of Colorado. Just had a mimeo. I went immediately and got a mimeo machine at a sale in Denver when I moved out there to start the Naropa Project, and it was the same thing. Just poetry could exist, sort of anywhere, and you work with the resources you have, and it's very, necessary. It's by any means necessary, poetry. So I'll stand by that. But I wanted to say that this book, just the title, Mesopotopia, is thinking about all the, of our time and going, I love to go to origins and back in time and so on. So Mesopotopia, where it all begins. The two rivers that I sing of in that last poem are the Tigris and Euphrates, of course, birth of civilization, thinking about that. And then, it's also the cradle. So the cradle of civilization, and then the death of civilization, as you have it, not necessarily in that part of the world, but that part of the world and our sort of capitalocene version from the, extraction of all the minerals and this and that, and the whole war on terrors with things over there, working against, it's just become this huge biblical sort of good, evil, life, death in this territory. So that was and then it felt like this, I call it a cri de coeur, and I talk about, I had a line here, urgency. I wanted this serial epic poem to consider origins, struggles, spiritual, philosophical insights, astral science, vast achievements of civilization and of creative community before threat of erasure. And I begin the poem. There's in the beginning, as you know, it was supposed to be this, it was supposed to be that. And then I play out a kind of screed of, it's a real montage, collage of different times and places and traditions. I wanted to look at the forms, coming from all the spiritual traditions, Christian and Buddhist, which is something I know a little bit about, and the Kabbalah and Native and so on. So, it was very important as we're finding things erased. And this racism is insane that we're going through, trying to wipe out Black culture from America. I mean, just crazy. So that became a cry of the heart. We've got to save our civilization. And I just wish the battle cry from the other side would include, poetry. I feel let down by some of the structures of our liberated society and what we've contributed to civilization, that there isn't, the progressives aren't standing more for the arts and the poetry and the culture. Not that they can be weaponized and they're not valuable and they're not, things you can gamble over, oil and power and tariffs and so on. I've yet to see the poetry tariffs be a big issue. It's just like I'd rather just take the word tariff apart, play with the vocabulary. And then I talk about, would all wisdom lie buried under the same rubble we're seeing daily, all over the world. And this was, an origin vector, passionate cause, which, I call it an epic, envisioned as emerging from, the pandemic, all the things we've been through these last years. I wanted all the inventories of my Cradle to the Grave project. It was, remnants of prophecy, brindled rivers entwined, speaking in tongues, antediluvian energies, deep in metabolic fields under poetry's feet. So these fields of energy with war and also, creativity and the weather. I mean, we're
Mm-hmm.
dealing, and I have to go back to the Shinto, the Japanese sense of weather being these elemental spirits, and they're angry. We're not taking care of things, unalignment and so on. And, waiting for the wisdom voices to come in. I sometimes think all I have is this poetry, which is a huge source from when it all started, pre-verbal, etc. The gestures and they talk of poetry being came before religion. It was the first religion. Poetry is the first religion. I mean, I find that in my studies. So taking that seriously at this time, and I had this opportunity with Penguin. They gave me a lot of freedom. I mean, at first it was going to be you can't go over 130 pages. And I said, well, I don't know. That would be very hard for me. I'm trying to take on, civilization. And there was actually, I had to cut out some. And I feel like there's also a coda somewhere in all this. And then also bringing in, as I said, these different traditions, including modernist, experimental, troubadour, from Vesper to Confession. I love the idea of these, pyramid texts, which
Mm-hmm.
go, are ceremonial with the pharaohs, and they have to cover their mouths, and there's all these things done as the body is prepared for death and that sort of thing. So looking at the rites of civilization of our time, thinking about, invoking them away for it's dirge to lullaby as well. And I've always loved the syncretic. So we're building, the civilization is built on this. I was in Mexico recently, and of course, you can go into the churches and feel the indigenous culture, elderly ladies burning copal, doing their own kind of ceremonies. And then you have the Virgin of Guadalupe there as, Christian, but also going back to other kinds of deities. And you see that, in everything. The syncretic is one of my favorite words. So syncretic and ceremonial. And I was writing this to quell my fear, my fear
Yeah.
of for my family. And the two children I dedicate the last poem to are my grandchildren. So that sense of something, what are we leaving? What are we leaving out of this ashes and rubble? And poetry, I'm glad I was able to do the audible because it's a way to invoke that oral tradition. And how do we pass things on? If we don't have our books and cuneiform and so on, how is can it only be written? And I've always liked that sense of tradition of telling your story, telling these time, what are the wars? What are the tribes doing? How are people living? So it's a tall order, and sometimes it's not done, but the world didn't end. So I was quelling my fear and writing until the world ended. I'll keep going.
Well, I am surprised at the scope of the project and hearing that you were given a 130-page limit. I think most poets would go, I don't know how to get to 130 pages unless I'm collecting multiple books. And your reaction was, I don't know if I can keep it that short.
Right.
So I don't want to ask, where did you get your idea from? But I do want to ask, how did something like this project come about? Because in some ways, it sounds like this great epic prayer to
Yeah, that's
civilization
good.
and the possibilities of civilization in ways that still have poetic play, even, no matter how depressed or depressing
Right.
literature might be. If there isn't a sense of play, then it's not literature. So Mesopotopia is a funny word,
Yes.
looking to this ancient civilization, hoping that there could be some germ of utopia in it, and looking at Gilgamesh for, okay, what wisdom might that have?
Exactly.
And the
Exactly.
idea is like, okay, if our current moment is overwhelming, and in part because of, Steve Bannon's program of flooding the zone with shit, it's like,
Hmm.
okay, well, we don't necessarily have to live in his zone. His zone is
No.
affecting everything, but we don't
Right.
have to mentally live there. So
Right.
let's look at all the things instead of just
Exactly.
those things.
Exactly.
It's a little bit overwhelming for a reader. Not too overwhelming, but there's a certain point in Ulysses where I stop worrying about every single word and the way it builds
Yeah.
meaning,
Yeah.
trying to stay alive to the ambition of the book
Hmm.
and the flavors of the book, because it exceeds simple reason.
Well, thank you. That's a compliment for me. But I must say that I felt it was like study. I invoke studying. This is a time to be studying, even memorizing, knowing what your connections are. If you're a poet, go deeper. It's not just how you feel, a dream you had, and so on. What is your passion? What's at the core of your heart center, and where and in an urgent time, what do you want to be be expressed as this cry, a cry for liberation in a way. And there's a great prayer in Buddhist prayer where I think it's Chenrezig, who's a figure of Avalokiteshvara, who's both sort of male and female male energy. And you're pleading, and the name Chenrezig is, the people crying, the people lamenting and asking for help, give us guidance, and so on. But I don't think there's something out there like an entity that's going to save us, pick us up, and take us to another planet. But in my studies, I came across one text where there are myriad worlds, some ancient Buddhist text, some myriad worlds. But we can see the planet Earth and its Milky Way and so on. And we're known in that text as the planet of endurance. So I take that to heart and I will endure. I mean, I feel, there's all the rubbish that's broken pottery and this and that, but endurance has this sense of commitment and staying with it. And that the poem guided me, really. I mean, it really guided me. And then when I could celebrate for example, the jazz musician Cecil Taylor, who's been dead for, almost a decade, I guess. But his work was strong for me as a young person growing up in Greenwich Village in New York. I met him. He also wrote poetry. He came to visit Naropa. I think I first met him with Allen Ginsberg, and we were in a jazz club in San Francisco. And Allen was always very, how do you do this? And how do you do that? And how come you're fingers are going so fast. So I was so happy to sort of conjure him up in this sense of the Egyptian text because, he had something that was enduring and royal to me. So things like that. And then going to the Confessions of Augustine. I mean, there are little jokes. So, the joke about Augustine, he was so involved with the astrology and the stars and magic, and then he became much more serious as a Christian or, whatever the boundaries of his imagination he was tempering down. So I play with that and I play with these. So I write these confessions, and I have one of my own at the very end of that little section where I say, and I confess my pride. And sometimes they talk about pride being the worst of the seven deadly sins. And I said, I'm going to be a proud poet. I can be proud of the poetry of the civilization. And then hermeneusence, the word hermeneusence. And it was like nuisance rather than nuisance, whatever. So this is a nuisance. And then you might know the work of the
That
poet Anne Carson. And I
mhm.
said, what do you think of this title, Mesopotopia? And she said, it sounds like my kitchen sink. I thought, okay, good. There's another level. There's another level. So I felt drawn, I felt inspired, as they say. I felt committed. I often feel like I'm on as this being on the planet at this age, like I'm a messenger. I want to be a messenger. I want to be on assignment, through poetry. Poetry is my skillful means to express what I hope are, imaginative things that go beyond, we're kind of stuck in serotonin hell. I think we're waiting for the next lift to the next empathy, bigger empathy. Because what's so upsetting about these times and the tenor, the tone coming out from, the White House, our situation, is this sadism. It's like people getting excited about harming the cruelty. They're just so enjoying their power to be cruel. And this is what worries me the most. So in terms of invoking some of the spiritual traditions where that is not so cool. I mean, you have the Old Testament and so on, eye for an eye, but it's not cool to be sadistic and killing children and naming people, locking them up, and just going all out for AI. Oh, let's just run the world in a inhuman way.
And the number of voices I've heard that are so orgiastically excited about AI, large
Like
learning models.
suicide, in terms of turning over your intellect and not, they don't have to study the way we do.
Well, yeah, like there's the liberal impulse. Okay, before we judge, let us see what good it could do. And then there are people who are like, it's going to earn us so much money. And
Oh,
there's no consideration as to what good or bad AI might do. It's so exciting because it's the next best thing, and we've invested
I think
billions
that's true.
so that on the liberal side, I'm not even sure this is like liberal conservative. Like it
No, I
doesn't really
don't think
make any sense.
you
But
can't. Yeah, yeah, I agree.
as I don't want to be closed-minded. However, there's something about the zeal of the maniacs who are pushing AI
Yeah,
that make me completely wary. And it's like, okay, if I start my judgment with the attitude of those persons, unless
right.
they're AIs who are pushing AI on me, occasionally I have had to ask that.
Yes.
I say this, I was accidentally listed as a corporate journalist.
Uh-huh.
So I was getting pitched all these AI stories, and
Oh
I'm
my
like, I
goodness.
am
Oh my
so
goodness.
confused.
Oh my
So
goodness.
I got my
But
name
yeah,
off that list and got a little more peace of
yeah.
mind.
But what we have to remember that it's a big industry as well. I don't know if you're aware of Trump has bought up lots of land. Lots of the techie people are buying land all over the globe for AI purposes, huge swaths of land. And that's not openly, announced every day. But that is another one of these things where, the moon, that was the moon landing and so on. It was for business and they've carved up parts of the moon and AI could be in the moon at some point. I mean, it's that divide and conquer always. So in a way, they enjoy the discussion, this kind of discussion, which distracts us, distracts us from the bigger picture of greed, ownership, power. There can be a next thing. It could be something else in
Hmm.
5 years, 10 years, and so on. So I just don't trust what we're always seeing. And then we're caught up in these dramas for or against. So I'm a little wary. I mean, I'm curious. Actually, the Dalai Lama, who's very interested in science, is a conference is coming up that I think he yearly pulls together of different thinkers and scientists, and it's all about the question of AI. I mean, this is the Dalai Lama looking into this, not from to buy it, but to
Right.
understand, to help people understand its power, and maybe it's it's not all about being holy either. It's about what it costs so much money to keep it going, the tax on the environment, the water that's required there might be parts of the planet starving, and yet AI will have its water. So just to keep that in mind, I have to remember, there are all these other, the black web and all these other scenarios. I try not to be a, alarmist or conspiracy theorist all the time, but there's all these other things at work. And at least poetry keeps me on a certain kind of path where I don't want to get, I don't have power like an army to come in and so on. Anyway, it's complicated, and some people I know are ready to go. Like, get me out of here. I'm always curious. I want to be a fly on the wall or what a little pixie on the wall. I've mostly been following what people do with it linguistically, and I found like somebody I had to write something about William Burroughs, and I've written about him. There's in my last book, there's a kind of essay on him, and I knew him, and he worked at Naropa, and I knew his work, and he was a complicated person. He was kind of like a very quiet, um, not a mad scientist, but scientific, and
Hmm.
thinking ahead, prophetic, and he talks about a lot of these things and the way information is used. And he died before all this internet stuff. But in any case, um, I guess the language problem. So a friend of mine said, "Well, why don't you just feed it into AI?" They're always offering, "Oh, we'll translate it and have them write." Okay, write as if you're Anne Waldman about William Burroughs. And I felt I was so embarrassed because, clearly there are terms that I use, and I've, created the visions for the themes of the summer writing program at Naropa that are often very, could take on the capital scene, Anthropocene, and so on. We had even had Cri de Coeur, Cry of the Heart. This coming summer is Metabolic Thrum. I thought I'd give it some real, metabolic thrum. Like it's so thinking about that, these friends, so it was like a little parlor game. We just started laughing. These are all little Anne Waldman tropes, and you're just getting your own thing kind of thrown back at you and not as well constructed.
Yeah.
And you can see through the, normal kind of, maybe a school paper sort of prose, and then getting things wrong or just being empty, saying nothing, just using words without any sense of what, the mind thinking behind them. So that's probably as far as I've gone. I mean, I appreciate people like Laurie Anderson, who's really examined it because she's such a musician and you can play with it with these machines and sound machines. But I can't say the jury's out, but what I'm seeing is the wrong people are in charge. And
Yes.
that's sort of the problem with everything. And then when they're, shutting down museums and grants for foreign people to come and study, or, a friend of mine is stuck in Colorado without any money because everything was gone. She was a PhD student studying literature, translating from Spanish literature, essentially, basically. And that's just one story of many. All these people won't, Chinese students won't come. This big insane thing creating a whole, we're already in a war with China, and we're not having students come to America. This is, who's in charge? Just psychopathic people trying to build up a case for total hegemony of this country. But I don't think we're going to be the world power.
I don't know that I would mourn losing that title. Um, things could get riskier, although it's
Yeah.
hard to imagine things riskier than they are now.
I
If I
agree.
try really hard, I could probably imagine things
Right.
riskier than they are now.
Well,
So,
I want to say one thing about freedom of speech, which is something we care about, and which Ginsburg and others, went to. And I was arrested at Rocky Flats with Daniel Ellsberg protesting plutonium. And so, when you step into a line of fray, and I worry about those kinds of actions are not as skillful as they might have been. I really do think we helped sort of close down Rocky Flats where it was in Colorado, but then it comes back. It's still they're still bringing in plutonium for the warheads, and there are going to be other kinds of toxins and all these systems of machinery and so on. All that changes. All these, the oral archive of Naropa might be have to be in a new form, something not even invented yet. So, with that in mind, what is it that motivates our heart? What is it we really want for our the sense of the continent? What do we want to leave behind? All this plastic in the ocean, killing all these animals and plant life and corals. What are we leaving behind? It's just senseless. We're in such a speeded up sense of ownership, money, throwing it out the window. It's been going on for a long time, but it's urgent, more urgent.
let's return to Mesopotamia
Good.
in more focus. This is the most ambitious poem I've read in a long, long time. For my podcast, I don't read many dead poets. So in
Oh,
contemporary literature, very few books like this come out nowadays. So how did the project get so big? And I don't want to give my audience who aren't familiar with the book, I don't know, too daunting a sense of the book.
right, right.
You can be daunted by it if you want to be, but it's not one giant poem, it's many poems.
I guess for me, it was a kind of architecture and this notion of the staves, because it's in seven staves, staves, interesting word, which is kind of like a staff and in fact, the Ark of the Covenant evidently was made up of staves. I like the use of that word. So the sense of the ark, like this boat or a book, a large book as an ark, thinking of all these, images and other kinds of metaphors. It was out of this sense. I was going to the New York Public Library. I had permission to go in the rare room, look at some books on specifically Mesopotamia, just to get a feel for that. And some of it's poetry and epics. So, you bring up Gilgamesh, a key epic in our larger sense of world poetry and always taught. If nothing else, maybe some people have heard of that or heard the word epic. And the notion of the epic was out of a or more oral tradition, telling the story of your people, your tribe, your wars, your encounters, going down to hell and coming back. So I like that idea of going into it and using, I love this John Ashbery collage that's on the cover. And I knew it and I wanted it and I was still writing the poem. So in a way, having that image of Babel with this, I don't know where he got this image of the metal. I mean, she's a wind-up doll,
Yeah.
this the white doll, and then throwing out a little airplane. It's like those little things we got as a kid, little light cardboard airplane. It's not quite just a paper airplane that you made yourself, but it's sort of throwing it into the void. And then this inside as a wind up. So thinking about AI, robotics, so on, and the combination of not being able to communicate. We're at loss, not knowing each other's languages. And that's the Tower of Babel and the rubble we're seeing in these countries, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, Palestine, and so on. It's just everywhere, this unalignment, disconnection, a mess, literally, and not being able to communicate. So that was something I wanted to grab at these pieces through the civilizations I've studied and known and enjoyed the poetry of, and kind of piece them together. It could be another version. The pieces could be put together differently. And then in terms of the form, so there's this stave, which is usually a little précis in front of the each section, which kind of, tells a little story. There's a little kind of story of, protest and down by Wall Street, when we were protesting around the Occupy years and so on, or bringing in things out of my own life, but not in a heavy, autobiographical way. And then the couple of elegies for poets I've known. And then I talk about this divination that they do in um, Iran, these divinations, and Hafiz, the poet Hafiz. So invoking these older poets that people might know. I mentioned T.S. Eliot and then a pyramid song. And then I go to the Mariana Trench, and I'm constantly trying to mix the elementals with the history, the poetry, the civilization. So I'm playing with it's kind of cinematic for me at times, breaks into stories, little fragments. So the whole idea, and I think it's Charles Bernstein who says something in the back, Mesopotamia is a restless, wrestling, rousing, terracotta, earthen, anti-warrior. So this idea of the terracotta, the shards, the brokenness of the time, the disconnect, so on. That was very key before I even had the whole sense of the book. So this Ashbury collage, actually, and I caught after he had died, I went to the estate and I said, I've got to have this. Does anybody else have this? I was being very good. Anybody else using this? I need it for my book. It's become like part of the story. And it says a lot, just the cover. What's going on? Why is this robot throwing an airplane? Why is she standing by the Tower of Babel? Is the Tower of Babel like running the world now? And this is how they're operating with a kind of AI, whatever. You make whatever you want of it. So these things, and then I delight in that and get kind of excited. And then I also think maybe by putting this together, throwing these things out, invoking, Saint Augustine, invoking various, female saints, invoking, Buddhist deities. And, I have one piece at the end called Extinction Aria, where I'm basically, and then I take You Shall Be Broken in Pieces from the book of Isaiah, because I'm feeling sorry for old people not having dental care. I mean, it's on that level. Let's go to Isaiah. And it's basically, and you shall be broken in pieces and nobody will listen to you because you're old and so on. And then in this Extinction Aria, it's more this is a time, and this was my vision, rocked back by the weirdness of days on Earth when the weather changed course and we lost our minds, when leaders failed us. There was no wisdom. Everyone was joking. Everyone was very entertaining when war kept going and animals were mimicking the end and starving kept on and there were people escaping across many borders, dying of it, the running. You meant to see them on the map. Borders were lines on a map. You strained at the screen, little dots. People were dots on the map, points of light with beating hearts. And this was coming out of our media. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
maps and war zones and being like little dots were just dots on the map for this kind of empire inclination. It's not just one person. I mean, there are a lot of people in on the Trump scheme, but this sense of being one of those little dots, but being, I'm going to shine a bit, looking up at the stars. There's an earlier book where I invoke, I think it's a dream by the poet Robert Duncan, and he dreams of a poetess pointing out the stars and saying, pay attention because we're at the end of the world. They were who's up there, the constellations, and feel that. Know that we've had a world. If you can imagine you've had a world and you see, well, we're in this version of it. This wasn't, it used to be this, it used to be that. And my father fought in World War II. I mean, that's where I was born right at the end of the war. And it blew my mind when I learned early that the war was over, or Hitler had died, but they went and bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki after his death. That to me seemed, this is where it just seemed out of control, where you needed to do that for this reason, and Japan might get more, et cetera. There's always a reason. But that the kind of logic of, and I just feel you and I, and everybody who's like can read and think and sees that something is wrong there's another version. We could all just work on it.
Well, I love the idea that this collage was somehow a touchstone that creatively helped you, keep working from the spine of this project. And I'm fascinated with whatever keeps our work in order, because if I'm working on any long form project, my own guess is left to my own devices without an organizing principle, whatever I write, it'll feel like being on a roller coaster that ends up upside down and submerged in
Huh.
jello and just stuck there.
Huh. That's
Um,
interesting.
I think I have a fairly chaotic mind, and people will say, no, you don't. And I will say, yes, because I urgently struggle to not just have everything
Right.
be this surreal jumble.
Well, I was a little afraid of that it would be too much of a jumble, and then what do you come away with? What do you feel? Are you feeling the urgency? Or you want to relish and appreciate your civilization? Think about it. Just even think about it. And one of our mottos at Naropa was, why people say, what does poetry do? Why do you even have a school? Blah, 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 about how to work and study. And well, it helps wake the world up to itself if you can feel that, if you are ready to be. I used to carry that sound at that sign at protests, and people just shake their head. What are you talking about, poetry? It said, keep the world safe for poetry, my sign. I said, if it's safe for poetry, maybe it'll be safe for a few other things.
The collage has this black and white illustration of this girl doll that, yeah, it looks like it's mechanical. And she has this gorgeous, colorful little plane that she's playing with before the Tower of Babel. And to me, it strikes the right chord.
Good.
Which is,
that makes me so happy.
This isn't simply pretty and this isn't simply happy, but play is always possible and flight is always possible.
And the beginning stave, I feel it's like a child speaking. I think it's, what does it say? Something like just asking questions. And I call it Sky and Gaze. Did you, the brindled rivers entwined? Did you see that? Devotees, archangels, poetry, horses, planets up there. Okay, I'll look. An Apatosaurus louisii. I'll look up, way down under. Or did you frame and reckon? Reckon what? An alphabet. Was it in flames? Yes. Did it tremble? Yes. Did you see? Oh, yes, vortex, golden letters, beckoning auras, like saints, like troubadours. Singing. Did the top of your head open up? Nectar come down? Was there singing? Did the top, oh, sorry, angels singing? Was it diving within? Were you small, commanding? Take me up, rise me up, asking, did that sky rise you up like a volcano? Did you call out, rising you up? Dizzy, did you call back, levitate? Did it call? Did it quake with naming of origins? So that was a spirit, like the young spirit. And I was coming across something thinking about as a child, there are all the poems of childish things, and I had to put away childish things. And I think we put away too many childish things. And just the curiosity, questioning, an openness and a freedom and feeling like you're rising up and it's not taking a lot of expensive toys. It's your mind, it's your imagination, it's your consciousness. You have that as a child, inquiring.
And as adults, it would help us if we could not be afraid of being a hermenuisance.
Thank you. I'm going to put that on you. Don't be afraid of being a hermenuisance.
One of the things about you as a poet is you're well known for being kind of the second generation beat poet. I feel like that's probably a great thing and a terrible thing to be known for.
Well, it's New York school as well, because I knew, Frank O'Hara and so on in Ashbury, I knew as a young poet, and that was more in a way the people who were around. Alan was off in India, and I had met Alan already, but I was drawn to the beats, the sense of the Fellaheen worlds, traveling to the underground, the interest in Asian religions, the political mind, and I felt I could join some of that cultural intervention, but I also very much roots in this. Sense of, I don't know how to characterize Frank O'Hara easily, but I love that spirit and humor and just walking down the street, and noticing, but in a very special way. So I would say I always combine, and I always talk about the New American Poetry, and there was that famous anthology, and that we came of age with that, sort of when, young and starting. That was an interesting book because it wasn't the official verse culture poets. It was the kind of renegades who were collected in that book, and it was very different from the other left-hand margin content poetry. The title told you the whole story, that sort of thing. So to stretch out on the page, invent your own forms, work with forms out of the past, and that sort of thing.
So to some degree, you saw yourself working in their tradition, if we can call it a tradition, in their spirit.
Yeah, in a spirit, definitely. And also they were people I knew, but I wanted more women. And I wanted, so I was investigating, women
Absolutely.
poets of
Yeah.
old and that sort of thing. I really loved Stein and so on, and HD, and women who had kind of, some of them had to leave America to do their work. Mina Loy, Gertrude Stein, and then, Diane DePrima, of course, associated with the Beats. And she was maybe, I don't know how much older, 15 years, maybe 13 years, but she was in situ in a hotel in New York. And I, sought her out. So I met her very young and I was impressed she could study tarot and do this and that and have children and run a magazine. And I wanted to be, sometimes it hurts you that, well, you don't have enough time to do your own work. I have so much work. I mean, I just couldn't, had to keep doing it. I'm lucky to be, I can have a lot and then pare back. But I also wanted to do what we call, or what I call, infrastructure poetics, infrastructure. So helping build places for people to congregate. I mean, neither Naropa or the poetry project were handed to us. I mean, when we started, I had at Naropa a desk with no handles. And in terms of feng shui, it was the worst. It was the worst corner in the building. It was like, get out of here if you want to be, continue, get out of here. Um, and then with the project, it was a grant from, we were already working in St. Mark's Church. It was a grant from the Office of Economic Opportunity under Lyndon Johnson, at least on something for civil rights and so on. But it was a grant to help alienated youth on the Lower East Side and also study what that meant to have creative things possible. So, I was always at this place, incredible places to generate the things that I mean, be part of it as well.
What's needed for such infrastructure? Because, one of the things I found is, all right, and I'm probably luring into a separate question here. You'll have to let me know if what you think, but encouraging teenagers to write, provided that we're not asking them to write an essay about literature that they may or may not care about,
Right.
they seem to just fall right into it almost effortlessly.
Yeah.
And I feel like so little in their instruction probably encourages them to do that.
Yeah, I would agree. Well, we had good, we were open, free, had workshops. And this is before some of the people in them teaching had taught before, Ted Berrigan and others. Um, I think Alice Notley, Bernadette Mayer, but we all had either graduated or done something with college or dropped out. But just that your work was you felt like you wanted to pass on some of the things that were helpful to you. But no, I agree. My nephew is a musician, is working on a project in prisons. I mean, it hasn't been cut yet, thank goodness. And there's so many gifted musicians. You can imagine. He's been a lot down south and recording. He's able to go in with recording music and he's making, and the project is called Radical Reversal. And I was listening to a lot of the poems and songs because there's sort of spoken word, but also songs and instruments and so on. But so many of all of the men and women, um, more men actually, young youth, I should say youth, but are talking to their mothers. So interesting. I said you should call this album Under Radical Reversal for the Mothers or something. It was just so incredible. It's like this, apologizing, explaining, the pouring of heart. And it's not just, gushy and sentimental. It's tough. So that's been interesting. I've worked in a prison for women in Mexico City, and the women, mostly Nahuatl, indigenous women, Mexico, know some of their poets. They know of Maria Sabina, who was a Mazatec native, and she died in the 80s, but she was well known. My poem "Fast Speaking Woman" comes out of a text I was introduced to orally. And then the other poet is Sor Juana, incredible poet of New Spain, in the 1700s. And she was amazing. She was a nun, but a nun then could have. I visited the monastery, or what do they call it in the monastery? Nunnery. She had a double room, a place for her books. She could have drink wine with the bishops. So what was going on? Clearly, New Spain wanted to keep some of its. She was influenced. She was a native person, but she was influenced by Gongora, a famous, traditional, very important poet within that culture. And but I just couldn't believe these women who were in trouble, mostly through men and the drug world down there, were so keen, and they started writing their own versions of what kind, I'm of this woman, I'm of that woman, off of Maria Sabina. And they dance for us. They study some of their traditional, they can use the courtyard, and they sometimes can have their children who will usually be orphaned later unless there's family. Anyway, it was so intense. But I just saw where it was helpful for them as thinking, consciousness and imagination, they don't cost anything, but they need nourishment and cultivation.
You seem to be quite prolific. And
Well, I wanted to tell you my first epic was 1,000 pages, the Eovis trilogy. That took about, 10 years straight. Coleridge said you study for about 10 years and then you write for 10 years if you're working on an epic, if you can stay alive.
yeah, well, one of the horrors of being a writer is you gain some confidence finishing projects. And then when you go on to the next project, you probably want to do something much different, which means you then have to learn all kinds of new things or study, as you say.
Yeah. I can't wait. I just want to live long. I mean, you get to this age and you're sort of like, oh my God, I just want to be able to walk and, you know.
So one of my favorite social activities of all time, probably yours too, is getting to visit with someone in their home, and then they go to the bathroom or go to get drinks or something, and you're left alone with their books. And you get to look at their book collection and see the eclectic curation, right, of their reading life, or at least the version you're seeing right in front of you. And, as Mesopotopia does that, it's such a lovely eclectic collection of references that some of which I'm like, oh, I know that. And I know that. I'm like, all right, I think I need to look that up. And that sounds like it's fun. I do feel like having a really broad frame of reference. I don't know. It's something I'm addicted to. So I don't know.
I can see.
I don't know if this is merely helpful for all people or if I'm a freak. I've heard both assessments about my nature. I do think that most often other cultures aren't as different as I would have suspected, the more deeply I read.
Yeah, that's very good. Very good observation. And that makes us closer, we should work on that.
So I took the last month off of podcasting and wrote 4 poems.
Oh, great.
3 of which they just like the voice in my head, just, here are words. And I'm like, I better write these down quick. And I think there's probably a relationship between me not releasing shows. It could just be me having more time.
Yeah, I think for me it's time, that kind of time. But it's true if you're working with writers and the podcasts and so on and checking other people out, it can be, not, I don't want to say overwhelming, but demanding of your, an energy of attention. And I get that. But I still like putting people together and combos. And I mean, I'm not publishing regularly, a little magazine, but occasionally there's a pamphlet of somebody's or a broadside, and I can be, supportive. And they say, do it yourself. This is so easy. This is how I started. This is how the poets I admire, they had confidence to do that. No, that's admirable. I think to have you don't have to apologize for taking time out for your writing, John.
Well, it wasn't exactly a plan. It was more for my sanity. Like I know it's going to be a struggle for me to get those shows out. One of the things I think I just learned is people don't necessarily want a show every week. And I think I've learned to appreciate that. Like the time we're spending here right now is very special to me. And I think it's a great conversation. And, if I do this every week, like I can't do my guests justice, and I can't.
Right.
It maybe not
I get
be
that.
the most exciting thing for my audience. So partly what I'm trying to do is ask if you have any advice about creating more time other than
Less
learning
sleep.
less
Less
sleep.
sleep. Or I can work. I'm on McDougal Street in Greenwich Village. It's very noisy. Noise used to stop at Houston when I was growing up, but now there's just 8 restaurants on the block, and the big delivery trucks are arriving, and there's a school across the street with children every morning, the school buses. So I work into the night because I find the daytime stuff. And the other day there was a big crunch outside, and they had knocked over it's right in front of my home, no parking sign or something, this big metal thing. It's still sitting out there. So every car runs over this metal. So I have to contend with the environment. Sometimes it can be useful and work, but often I'm raging. So working, like work late at night, I find it's less taxing in a way. I mean, often if you get distracted by watching the news or something else, or television, or late night comedy or movies, or sometimes you need that kind of stuff. But I've just haven't been doing that. I decided this circle of this, what's going on right now, I'd rather just get it through, various other sources and on my own time. And so that's part of it for me. But my mother was like this. She could survive on maybe 5 hours a night of sleep. And I've always kind of had that. I don't know if it's a curse or a blessing, but I do quiet down and then I can just stay with a notebook, a couple of things, and I'm not trying to, oh, I need to know that I have to reach somebody here, answer this letter. Just let that nighttime be creative. And sometimes it's just reading. I just read this interesting novel. It's a Booker Prize, I've forgotten her name, British woman, called Orbital. It's a very short novel, and it's basically above the Earth. One of these missions, astronaut missions. There's 6 astronauts, and it's only 250 miles up, but they have to complete 16 cycles in 24 hours. But at one point, it gets very poetic. It's as if, some understanding of relationship to the Earth when you can see it this way. It just flipped me out of, something like that image of seeing it in a different way. I remember there's, a sense of being on planet Earth, and you're looking up often through clouds or through smog and so on. And so to have this other kind of viewpoint, you get your mind on top of the cloud, you're looking down more like the sun. So just shifts of perspective can help me. And trying to, I'm cutting back coffee. I never drank coffee until COVID. I needed something new. So I thought, oh, I'll try coffee. I don't know. People are surprised. I just know nothing about coffee, but anyway. So it's down to decaf, because I'm just too wired. I don't know. I'm glad you seem like a very serious artist and reader and thinker. And you sometimes you have to tell people I'm on retreat today. I'm just taking a 24-hour retreat.
Well, nobody complained when I took a month off. And
Good,
what I found
good,
was, yeah, I returned to myself a little bit. There's the
good.
part of me that's, work related. Like okay, my students require feedback, like work, 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 work. And if I'm not careful, the podcast feels like that. And if that's
Yes.
the main feeling of the podcast, then, it lets me have conversations like this, but I can't. If the podcast becomes primarily work, then I don't feel like I'm doing it in the right spirit.
Hmm.
But I also think, probably like you, I just need to keep finding new ways to kind of
Yeah.
keep myself
But
to
also what
myself.
you're doing, you're benefiting people. This is beneficial to me. I've learned a lot just in our hour together. It's
Well, and I don't have a good interviewing style other than I listen and I ask questions. And
very good.
I try
Very,
not to be too intimidated with the questions that I ask. But recently I love classical music, but because I have really bad tinnitus, because I
mm,
saw AC/DC in 1988, after a bunch of other heavy metal shows. So I have a problem, which is if I listen to normal orchestral music, the quiet parts are so quiet that they always just sound like my head screaming because my head is
Oh
always
no. Oh
screaming.
no. Oh dear.
And what I figured out is okay, but if, like, when I listen to quartets and things,
Hmm.
there are fewer quiet spots. And I can listen to organ music or piano music where seldom do the quiet parts get so quiet that the music sounds like me screaming or my head screaming.
Goodness.
So I figured out, okay, if I curate the classical music I listen to properly, then I can get my head filled with this beauty and maybe get out of myself a bit.
Yeah. Well, that helps me. Certain if it's some really good movie, I go to, movies from all cultures and so happy when, there's a Kurosawa thing for a week or something like that. But that actually can lift me out of my, panic around all these things going on and panic for others, frankly, for children and all of that. And also feeling, oh my goodness, I've lived such a blessed life at this time of a golden age in a way from not with, I mean, not the Vietnam War and all this other suffering stuff, but as a creative person, being able to be in community and making things and help create these schools and magazines, et cetera, and have freedom of, knowing there are people in locked up and don't even have the utensils to write. I mean, I visited, somebody who's had some psychological problems at this time, and it's like a lockdown scene where you're not allowed, a book is considered a possible weapon,
Mm-hmm.
and you have a tiny little pen, the size of a toothpick. You're just looking, so that kind of thing that goes on, I feel you're also awake to the woes of the world, but it's in our way. I think a creative approach is the best. What furthers, getting out of a room where you're just staring at the ceiling, the bars, and just these images of which we're getting now of detainment and these. I did go down to El Paso to the building with they were having children in there, but the
Mm-hmm.
walls were so thick you couldn't hear them crying. But it was important to just sort of see it in this version of the world we're in, that these things can actually uh, be built by human beings and then cause so much suffering. So I have to remember, and there are various kind of Buddhist practices just to be able to take it, breathe it in, let it out, try to send a kind of efficacy, but also do what you know how to do, even if you feel powerless. But I mean, this is delightful. You can, through poetry and the music you're describing, if without tinnitus, you can, be transported. And then you're bonding with the creative being who's made those things. And although, I mean, maybe AI will be able to help in that way when things are even harder, and maybe your taste would, stretch to include AI if that's all there is. I have no idea.
There's such a wealth of old things that are still
Yes, exactly.
alive,
That's what I was trying to do in this book
that are
too.
still alive if we find them. And
Very good point.
that is the really sexy thing about Mesopotopia is
Thank you. Thank you.
how all the sciences, including including the old non-sciences and just
Right.
whatever might have human wisdom seems touched by this book,
Thank
and
you.
in a way that seems very serious and playful and most of all alive.
Thank you so much. It means a lot.